John Wayne stood on the side of a dusty New Mexico road and watched something that stopped him cold. It was the summer of 1963. The sun was already brutal by 9 in the morning, and right there, in front of a small adobe house on the outskirts of Albuquerque, a family was being pushed out onto the street. A sheriff stood at the door, not angry, not cruel, just doing his job. But that didn't make it any easier to watch. A mother clutched her youngest child against her chest. 2 older kids sat on the front steps, confused, scared, not fully understanding why strangers were carrying their furniture outside. The father stood with his back straight, jaw tight, trying to hold himself together in front of his family. Boxes, chairs, a small kitchen table. All of it, out on the sidewalk. Nobody stopped. Nobody helped. The world just kept moving. Except John Wayne. By the way, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments, I'd love to know. To understand why this moment mattered so much, you have to understand what America looked like in 1963, especially in a place like New Mexico. This was not the glamorous America you see in the movies. This was the America that most people never talked about. New Mexico in the early 1960s was one of the poorest states in the entire country. Small towns, dirt roads, families living paycheck to paycheck, if they were lucky enough to even have a paycheck. The gap between rich and poor was enormous, and for working-class families, one bad month could mean losing everything. The Garcia family, we'll call them that, were not unusual. The father, Robert, worked at a local construction site doing hard labor 6 days a week. The mother, Elena, took in laundry and sewing work from neighbors to bring in a little extra. They had 3 children. They were not lazy. They were not careless. They were just poor in a system that had very little mercy for poor people. Their monthly rent was around $40, which doesn't sound like much today, but back in 1963, for a family like theirs, $40 was a mountain. When Robert's construction site shut down for 3 weeks due to a contract dispute, the family fell behind. 1 month became 2. 2 months became a notice on the door, and by the time anyone could do anything, the sheriff had already been called. The landlord wasn't a villain either. He was just a man who needed his money. That's how these stories usually go. No single bad guy, just a system that grinds people down until they break. And the Garcia family was breaking. The morning of the eviction started like any other. Elena woke up early and made breakfast, eggs and tortillas, the same thing she made every morning, because even on the worst days, you feed your children first. Robert sat at the kitchen table and didn't eat. He just stared at the wall, knowing what was coming. The knock came at 8:15. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. When the sheriff knocks on your door on a Tuesday morning, you already know why he's there. Robert opened the door, listened to the official words, nodded slowly, and then turned back to his family. "We have to go," he said quietly. What followed was the kind of scene that breaks something inside a person if they watch it long enough. The family had maybe an hour to gather what they could. Elena moved through the house like a woman in a dream, picking up photographs, folding clothes, trying to decide in minutes what mattered most out of a lifetime of small possessions. The children carried pillowcases stuffed with toys and shoes. The oldest boy, maybe 10 years old, tried to help his father carry the mattress outside without being told to. Neighbors watched from their porches and windows. Some looked away. A few had sympathy on their faces but kept their distance. Because in that world, getting involved in someone else's eviction meant risking your own. People were scared. Kindness was a luxury. By 9:30, everything the Garcia family owned was sitting on the sidewalk in front of a house that was no longer theirs. The door was locked behind them. Elena sat down on a wooden chair, her own chair now on the street, and held her youngest baby and did not cry. She was past crying. She was in that quiet, hollow place that comes after the worst has already happened. Robert stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at the ground. He had no plan. He had maybe $12 in his wallet. He had 3 children and a wife, and nowhere to go. The sun was getting hotter by the minute. It was the kind of moment that makes a man feel invisible, like the whole world could walk right past him and not even notice he was there. But one man noticed. John Wayne was in New Mexico that summer for work. He had been scouting locations for an upcoming production, the kind of trip that took him through small towns and open desert roads far from Hollywood cameras and studio executives. Wayne loved these trips. He always said the real America lived out here, not in Beverly Hills. He was being driven through Albuquerque that morning when his driver slowed down near a residential street because of some commotion. Wayne looked out the window. He saw the furniture on the sidewalk. He saw the sheriff walking back to his car. He saw the children. He saw Elena sitting in that chair. And he told the driver to stop. Now here's what you need to understand about John Wayne. Not the movie star, not the legend, but the actual man. People who knew him personally said the same thing over and over again. What you saw on screen was not so different from who he was in real life. He played men who didn't talk much, who acted instead of debated, who saw something wrong and did something about it without waiting for permission or applause. That morning he got out of the car. He didn't walk over to the family first. He didn't make a speech or introduce himself. He stood at a short distance and watched for a moment, just long enough to understand the situation completely. He asked a local man standing nearby what had happened. The man explained, "Behind on rent, landlord called the sheriff. Family had nowhere to go." Wayne nodded. He asked one more question, "Who owns this property?" The man told him, "A landlord who had an office 2 streets over." Wayne got back in the car. He didn't say anything dramatic. He didn't promise anyone anything. He just said to his driver, quietly, "Take me to that office." That was John Wayne. Not a man who talked about doing the right thing, a man who just went and did it. In a world full of people who stood on porches and watched, he was the kind of man who got back in the car and drove to find a solution. He had seen enough. He had heard enough. The time for standing around was over. The landlord's office was a small, plain room above a hardware store. Wayne walked in without an appointment. When the secretary looked up and realized who was standing in front of her, she nearly knocked over her typewriter. Wayne was calm. He asked to speak with the landlord directly. Within minutes, he was sitting across from a man who had no idea what was about to happen. Wayne didn't argue. He didn't lecture the man about compassion or responsibility. He simply asked how much the family owed, and how much it would take to keep that house available for them for the next 6 months. The landlord gave him the number. Wayne reached into his jacket, pulled out his checkbook, and wrote the check. 6 months of rent, paid in full, right there on the spot, without hesitation, without negotiating, without making the landlord feel guilty or the moment bigger than it needed to be. He simply paid what needed to be paid. He had one condition. The family was to be told the rent had been taken care of by a friend. No name, no credit, no story in the newspaper, no phone call from a publicist, nothing. Wayne shook the landlord's hand, walked back downstairs, got in his car, and left. He did not go back to speak to the family. He did not wait around to see their reaction. He did not tell his people to tip off a journalist so the story could be turned into good press. In an age when celebrities were just learning how to use charity as a marketing tool, John Wayne did the opposite. He gave quietly, completely, and then disappeared. The landlord kept his word. That afternoon he sent a message to the Garcia family, still sitting on that sidewalk with their belongings, that a mistake had been made. The rent situation had been resolved, and they were welcome to move back in. Robert Garcia stood there and read that message twice. Then he read it a 3rd time. He didn't know what had happened. He didn't know who had done it. But something had shifted. Something that had felt completely broken just hours ago had somehow been repaired. The children carried their things back inside. Elena walked through the front door of her home again, and John Wayne was already miles down the road. They found out the truth weeks later, the way small-town secrets always come out eventually. Someone who had been in the landlord's office that morning recognized Wayne and quietly told a neighbor who told another, until the story slowly made its way back to the Garcia family. Robert heard it first. He sat down and didn't say anything for a long time. Elena cried, not the desperate, hollow crying of the eviction morning, but the other kind. The kind that comes when someone shows you that the world is not as cold as it looked an hour ago. The kind of crying that feels like relief and gratitude and disbelief all at once. The children didn't fully understand. They just knew that a famous cowboy had helped their family, and for years after, the oldest boy would tell the story to anyone who would listen, not as a celebrity story, but as a lesson. My father always said, he would explain, that the man didn't do it to be remembered. He did it because it was the right thing to do. That distinction mattered more than anything, because it's easy to be generous when people are watching. It's easy to write a check when there's a camera nearby and a publicist ready to send out a press release. What's rare, genuinely rare, is the person who does a good thing and then walks away before anyone can even say thank you. That takes a different kind of character. That takes someone who genuinely doesn't need the credit. Someone who did it not for the story, but for the family sitting on the sidewalk in the hot New Mexico sun. John Wayne was that person. This was not an isolated moment. People who worked with John Wayne throughout his career tell similar stories. Quiet acts of generosity that he never publicized, never used for image building, never turned into headlines. There was the time he paid the full medical bills of a crew member's son who had been in a serious accident during a film production. No announcement, just a check sent directly to the hospital. There were the veterans he quietly supported for years, men who had come home from war to difficult lives, whom Wayne helped with money, housing, and jobs, all without a single press release. He famously told a colleague once, "I don't give a damn about getting credit. Credit is for people who need it." Hollywood in the 1960s was full of stars who carefully constructed public images of charity and kindness. Wayne was different. He was the same man on a New Mexico street corner that he was on a movie set or in a private meeting, direct, action-oriented, and completely uninterested in applause. The characters he played on screen, the quiet cowboys, the soldiers, the men who didn't make speeches but got things done, they weren't entirely fiction. They were, at least in part, a reflection of something real inside the man who played them. That's what made John Wayne more than a movie star. The screen can make anyone look like a hero for 2 hours. It takes real character to be one when no one is filming. He wasn't perfect, no person is, but on that summer morning in 1963, on a dusty street in Albuquerque, he was exactly the kind of man America needed him to be. There is a certain kind of goodness that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't post about what it did. It doesn't wait for a thank you. It doesn't calculate the return on investment or wonder how it will look to the public. It just sees a problem, solves it, and moves on. Because that's what decent people do. We live in a world that rewards visibility. We celebrate the loudest voices, the biggest platforms, the most dramatic gestures. But the most powerful acts of kindness in history were almost always the quiet ones. The check written in a small office above a hardware store. The handshake. The drive back down the road before anyone could even look up. John Wayne didn't save the world that morning. He just saved one family's home. He gave a father back his dignity, a mother back her door, and 3 children back their bedroom. That's not a small thing. For the Garcia family, it was everything. And he did it without needing it to be anything more than what it was. The next time you have the chance to do something good, something real, something that costs you something, ask yourself this: would you still do it if nobody ever found out? If the answer is yes, then you already understand what made John Wayne worth remembering. Not the films, Not the fame, not the legend. Just a man, a checkbook, and a family that needed one person to stop.